message from the military leader, Ibrahim Traoré, is loud and clear. Democracy is not the priority anymore.
For decades, the world has looked at the Sahel through a lens of pity, a region defined by dust, distance, and seemingly endless instability. But in the heart of Burkina Faso, a new narrative is being written in the language of defiance. Ibrahim Traoré, the world's youngest head of state, has declared what he calls a progressive popular revolution. This is not merely a changing of the guard in a military barracks. It is a total divorce from the political structures inherited from the colonial era. By suspending the 2024 elections and extending military rule by half a decade, the leadership in Ouagadougou is making a profound and controversial bet that for a nation in the grip of an existential war, security is the only true form of sovereignty. They are choosing the stability of the fortress over the ceremony of the ballot box. To understand this shift, one must understand the ghost that haunts the halls of Ouagadougou, Thomas Sankara. To the Burkinabe leadership, and to a growing neo-Sankarist movement across the continent, the 1987 assassination of Sankara was the moment Africa's heart was cut out by external interests. When Traoré speaks of traitors gathering in neighboring Abidjan to plot a repeat of history, he isn't just speaking of a coup, he is speaking of a recurring cycle where African leaders who prioritize their own people are systematically removed. In this worldview, the Western demand for immediate democracy in the middle of a terrorist insurgency isn't a humanitarian plea. It is seen as a Trojan horse. It is a mechanism designed to keep the state weak, fragmented, and dependent on foreign military assistance that has historically failed to stop the bleeding. The numbers tell a grim story of why this trust has eroded. Groups like JNIM and other affiliates now shadow nearly 40% of the country. For the mother in a rural village, democracy has not provided a shield against the raids. This is why the revolution is focusing on order and discipline. But sovereignty is a heavy crown, and it has come at a staggering cost. Between 2023 and 2025, while the state reported the recapture of lands held for half a decade, reports emerged of a dark symmetry. Over 1,200 civilians were killed, not just by the insurgents, but in the crossfire of a total war involving security forces and volunteer militias.
The people of Burkina Faso must forget about democracy. It is not for us. We have tried it, and where has it led us? To the brink of the abyss. We are in a revolution, a popular progressive revolution. We will establish order and discipline so that we can progress. Everyone must understand this.
The great danger of this new path is that in the rush to save the nation from the outside, the state might alienate the very people who reside within it, particularly the Fulani communities who often find themselves caught between the hammer of the revolution and the anvil of the insurgency. While the Sahel fights for the integrity of its soil,
Ethiopia is preparing to join one of the most exclusive clubs in the world, the Nuclear Energy Club. And it's doing so with the backing from Russia's Vladimir Putin.
Ethiopia is looking to the stars, or more accurately, to the atom. In the high altitudes of Addis Ababa, a different kind of revolution is brewing. For years, Ethiopia has defined its progress through the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a gargantuan feat of engineering that promised to turn the Nile into the continent's battery. But the leadership has realized that a modern superpower cannot rely on the heavens alone. Climate change is making the rains unpredictable, and the Nile's water is now a source of intense regional friction. Ethiopia is a nation of 120 million souls, yet it generates only 5 gigawatts of power. To put that in perspective, that is like trying to power a sprawling industrial metropolis with a handful of flashlights. On March 31st, Ethiopia signed a landmark roadmap with Russia's Rosatom. This is the birth of the nuclear renaissance. By 2032, Ethiopia intends to be a regional nuclear heavyweight, splitting the atom to fuel its $30 billion national development program. This is about more than light bulbs. It is about the oil refineries, the international airports, and the industrial parks that will define the next century of African trade. However, the geopolitics of this move are as complex as the physics of the reactor. By choosing the Kremlin's technology, Ethiopia is tethering its energy security to Moscow for the next 80 years, the typical lifespan of a nuclear facility. It is a strategic trade-off, independence from the fickle rains of the Nile, in exchange for a multi-generational technical and political dependency on a new partner. This nuclear gamble is being watched with bated breath in Cairo. Egypt is a nation that has lived by the grace of the Nile for millennia, and it now faces an energy crisis so acute that the lights are being dimmed in its famous cafes at 9 p.m. to prevent a total collapse of the grid. But instead of the war drums of the past, Egypt is engaging in what can only be described as dam diplomacy. Recognizing that Ethiopia's rise is inevitable, Cairo is moving to secure its interests further south by funding and building water projects inside Uganda. This is a subtle, sophisticated critique of the Ethiopian approach. By investing in the infrastructure of the southern Nile basin, Egypt is attempting to prove that there is a cooperative path to development, one that relies on consensus rather than unilateral action. But the backdrop to this diplomacy is increasingly grim.
Two nations navigating a global energy crisis. There's clearly no time to lose.
East African economies are being pushed to the brink by skyrocketing fuel and food prices, a direct consequence of the fires burning in West Asia and the Red Sea. This is no longer just a diplomatic spat over water rights. It is a fight for food sovereignty. When the sea lanes are choked, the price of grain in a market in Kampala or Cairo becomes a matter of national security. The era of cheap globalized resources is over, and the Nile Basin countries are realizing they must build their own shields against the coming storms.
To the locals, it's a sacred site of shrines and ancestors. But to the rest of the world, it's a $62 billion gold mine. Not for gold, but for something even more precious in the 21st century: rare earths.
Finally, we turn our gaze to the coast of Kenya, to a place where the spiritual world meets the industrial future. Mrima Hill in Kwale County is a lush, sacred sanctuary, home to the shrines of ancestors and the history of the local people. But to the global market, it is a $62 billion vault of niobium and rare earth minerals. These are the blood vessels of the modern world. Without niobium, the high-strength steel required for jet engines does not exist. Without rare earths, the smartphones in our pockets, the batteries in our electric vehicles, and the turbines of the green energy revolution are impossible to manufacture. The global race for these minerals has reached a fever pitch. Currently, Beijing controls nearly 90% of the world's rare earth processing, creating a monopoly that has left the rest of the world desperate for a foothold in African soil. Mrima Hill has become the new front line of this scramble. For decades, mining in Africa followed a predictable, tragic pattern. Raw materials were extracted by foreign firms, shipped across the ocean for processing, and sold back to the continent as finished goods, while the locals were left with polluted water and empty pockets. Kenya, however, is attempting to break the resource curse. The 2019 mining ban was a rare moment of state-led restraint, a pause button hit to prevent the environmental and economic looting that has defined the continent's history. The current global tender is a demand for something different: local processing. The Kenyan government is signaling that it is no longer enough to just dig a hole in the ground. They want the factories, the laboratories, and the wealth to stay in Kwale. But the people living on the hill are divided. For some, the minerals are a ticket to a life they have only seen on screens: cars, modern homes, and an end to generational poverty. For others, it is the beginning of the end for their sacred heritage. The story of Mrima Hill is the story of the new African dilemma: how to embrace the technological future without becoming a footnote in someone else's empire. From the military barracks of the Sahel to the nuclear sites of Ethiopia and the mineral-rich hills of Kenya, a singular message is being broadcast to the world. Africa is no longer waiting for permission to lead. We are drafting our own political playbooks, building our own reactors, and putting a sovereign price on our own sacred soil. The era of the outsider telling us how to govern or how to grow is coming to a close. But as we embrace this new era, we must remain vigilant. We are replacing old dependencies with new alliances, and old systems with new experiments. We must ask ourselves if these new paths truly lead to the liberation of the African person, or if they simply offer a more sophisticated form of the same old traps. The world is watching the Sahelian revolution and the Kenyan mines because they know that he who controls the source will eventually control the tune. The question remains, will we be the ones playing the music, or will we once again find ourselves dancing to a rhythm composed elsewhere? As we move forward, let us ensure that the voice of Africa is not just a slogan, but a reality reflected in the dignity of every citizen from the Sahel to the sea. This is the moment we decide if we are the masters of our fate. The world is watching. And for the first time in a long time, so are we. This is the voice of Africa. Voice